on Prime Crime.
When I got the call that Karl passed away, my instinctive thought was, it's got to be her.
A savage murder.
It was just shock and dismay. We couldn't believe what was going on.
An elusive killer.
I find her to be incredibly manipulative.
And a call for justice.
And you put the gun 12 to 24 inches from his head and pulled the trigger, correct?
Hey there everybody, I'm Jesse Weber and welcome to Prime Crime. This is where we do a deeper dive into the most high-profile and memorable true crime cases. Now this story is about how authorities were trying to catch a killer for years, and when they finally did, you're never going to believe what they heard. March 12, 2007 may have been a normal day for many people, but for the family of Air Force Major Karl Hoerig, this was the start of a nightmare. After Hoerig didn't report to work, law enforcement go to his home in Newton Falls, Ohio, and discover his dead body.
It was just shock and dismay. We couldn't believe what was going on.
Authorities would conclude that Karl had been shot 3 times, his body found at the bottom of a stairwell and covered with a tarp. But there was something missing from the house, or rather, someone.
And she wasn't around. It was very easy to put 2 and 2 together. It was very obvious what happened.
Claudia Hoerig, Karl's wife, was nowhere to be found. Investigators would soon find out that their main suspect was not only no longer in Ohio, she wasn't even in the U.S. Instead, she had left for her native country of Brazil days earlier.
When I got the call that Karl passed away, my instinctive thought was, it's got to be her.
While some who knew the couple sensed something might be off, Karl's friend Krista Bridges would tell authorities an eerie story about Claudia. The year prior to Karl's death, Bridges said Claudia made this comment about Karl at a bachelorette party.
I was eating, and then Claudia just leaned over and said, if he ever left me, I'd kill him.
Authorities learned that Claudia had purchased a gun days before the shooting, took out money from the bank, and made a quick getaway. But with Claudia now in Brazil, authorities and Hoerig's loved ones faced a major legal obstacle.
Brazil does not normally extradite to the U.S. for their own citizens. She was, in fact, born in Brazil.
This was a very difficult process from the beginning. They were not going to extradite Claudia Hoerig, and that's when we started talking with the local congressman. Tim Ryan did a really good job of creating publicity around this case. And then when I started the Facebook page, Justice for Karl Hoerig, I had an international audience, and many people from Brazil supported our efforts.
The fight by politicians, lawyers, and Karl's supporters to get Claudia back to the States would last over 10 years. But then, a breakthrough. The Brazilian government revokes Claudia's citizenship in 2013, and in 2018, she's officially extradited back to America.
Interestingly, she had relinquished her Brazilian citizenship in exchange for an American citizenship.
It was touch and go all along. I was ecstatic. Now we finally had a chance to present the case.
When Hoerig is finally arrested, this is where things take a different turn.
So you're willing to talk us without a lawyer? Yes. And you're sure of that? Because it has nothing to hide.
I believe that Claudia thought that she could outsmart everyone. She obviously had a lot of time to think through her answers to almost every single question. The one thing she didn't lack was answer.
Hoerig begins by explaining how she met Karl online and they married in 2005. But this relationship, at least according to her, was very strange.
He went on a crazy lifestyle of doing all kinds of perverted stuff, men, women, everything. He forced me to play dead. He would only have an orgasm if I played dead.
Hoerig said the behavior got worse.
He had boxed with things that he tortured me with. Ropes, the whip, and he made me walk around naked in the house on
I thought that that description was problematic. It was when people are telling lies that they go a few steps too far, and she really laid it on heavy with kink shaming, essentially. I think, number one, to engender sympathy, and number two, to smear him, to make him look like he deserved it and that she was being abused.
Hoerig even blamed Karl's alleged mistreatment for multiple miscarriages.
And I got sick. After a few days, my body just couldn't take it anymore.
In terms of blaming him for the miscarriages, that also is bizarre. As far as I know, there is no medical proof of that.
About 2006, I got pregnant again. And again, he did the same thing to me, the same torture.
It would be totally uncharacteristic for those kinds of things. Those things, if valid, should have been brought up ahead of time.
Hoerig explained that her situation became so dire, particularly when she became pregnant for a third time, that she eventually decided to commit suicide.
I'm not going to have an abortion. There's nothing that's going to make me have an abortion. And he doesn't want the child. What am I going to do? Kill myself.
When you look at some of the behaviors that she's exhibited in, you do see especially some traits of borderline personality disorder. A lot of suicidal gestures, a lot of threats for suicide attempts. This is all really consistent with what we're seeing with her.
Coming up next, was suicide really Claudia's plan, or rather, murder?
My plan was never, not for one single minute, to kill anybody. I swear to God, there was not for a single minute I thought about it. That shows his character, all the things that he did to me, how he screamed at me, how he cursed at me, how he abused me.
After an over 10-year legal and political battle, in 2018, Claudia Hoerig is extradited from Brazil back to the United States for the murder of her husband, Karl Hoerig, who was found shot to death in his home back in 2007. However, when Claudia decides to speak with investigators on her return to America, she accuses Karl of physically and emotionally abusing her, which led her to want to commit suicide. But listen carefully to her plan.
The best way of committing suicide was with the gun. But the downside of killing yourself with a gun is that it has a recoil. That most people that try to kill themselves, they lose part of their face, but they don't die.
Yet Hoerig apparently had a solution.
What I do, I went to the gun store. I asked for a gun that was small enough for my hands. I went to firing range, right?
A little research on it. I mean, obviously.
A lot.
Not only that, but Hoerig also allegedly built a homemade contraption to shoot herself.
That hole should be right here. Right here.
I do not believe that her plan was to kill herself. She purchased a weapon that had laser sights, and then she went and practiced it, afraid of some phantom recoil. And then she also built a box that she could steady the barrel of the gun in order to shoot more accurately. That is not something that you typically or ever see in the case of suicide.
Battered wife syndrome is really just kind of a subset of PTSD. A person believes that they are in extreme danger and can't leave. That's really not been the case in this relationship. There were plenty of times where she was left alone, where she had opportunities to leave, and that just didn't happen.
Let's move to the day of the shooting. Claudia claims she was pregnant for a third time and got into a heated argument with Karl over whether to have the child. At one point, he decides to take a shower, and that's when she decides to act.
I had to do something very shocking for him to shake him up. So when he opened the door and see me with the gun, he saw me with the gun to my head, he would have no reaction. He would keep staring at me. He said, that's a very good idea. Go to the basement to do that, because you're going to splash my paintings. You're going to splash blood all over my paintings. And I got very angry. If he hadn't said that, I would be dead, he would be alive.
What happened next?
Well, what happened next is that I got very angry and I got up real fast and I shot.
I don't think that this is a snap. I think that that had been carefully contrived over years of planning to explain away what otherwise looks like a cold, premeditated murder.
The act of shooting somebody, the act of killing somebody, takes a lot of steps and it takes a lot of desensitization. That is not normal for most people. I don't think she snapped.
It's what Claudia did after the shooting, though, that really cast doubt on this attempted suicide, unintentional killing theory. First, she said she wanted to shoot herself, but didn't realize she didn't have any bullets left.
I pulled the trigger, nothing happened. I said, my bullets. What happened?
Then she calls her family, who convinces her to escape.
And they said that Ohio had death penalty.
She goes to the bank to drain out an account.
I have $1,300 in the bank account. If I clean it up, they will know that I killed my husband. I was paranoid. So I only got $1,000 and left $300 in the bank account.
And before she leaves, she decides to cover up Karl's body.
I want to have time to write. So I put a cover over him and a letter. In case somebody came to the window, they would not see his body. So I would have time to take him in.
To get out of the country.
To get out of the country.
All this was done in very quick succession after the shooting, which leads you to believe that she was fleeing, and fleeing can be used as a fact to evidence guilt. If you are someone who behaved in a rage and you felt contrition and it was a big mistake that was predicated upon years of abuse, which is her claim, you wouldn't necessarily run.
I find her to be incredibly manipulative. I think this is what she does, is she likes to take control of situations, and she's hopeful that with her charm and her being playful that she may be able to get out of this.
Okay. I'm already dead inside.
It's one thing for law enforcement to not believe that Claudia was an abused woman who snapped, but what about a jury?
I did this. I killed Karl, and I'm about to kill myself.
Stay with us.
Do you know where that first shot hit him?
No, I actually, I was just shooting.
After her extradition back to the United States, Claudia Hoerig is arrested and charged with the murder of her husband, Air Force Major Karl Hoerig. During her 2019 trial, the prosecution attempted to show that she planned to shoot and kill her husband, while her defense team argued this was a spontaneous act fueled by years of alleged abuse and Karl's indifference towards his wife's life.
And she shot him because at her moment of weakness, 30 days after she's attempted suicide, when she wants to have a conversation with him, he tells her, go ahead, kill yourself.
Moment of weakness is just, it is a term of art, but it's something that is basically a heat of passion defense, that you are so enraged that in that moment of weakened state, you act out upon those feelings. That is theoretically possible from the statement that she claims her husband made.
Well, there was no one better than Claudia herself to tell her side of the story.
Did you plan to kill Karl Hoerig?
Never for a second.
Yet it was when the prosecution cross-examined Hoerig that the fireworks really began.
Before you shot Karl Hoerig, you were upset that he had an engagement party for you at Put-in-Bay, correct?
I thought that was very weird. That was a sign that something.
Yes or
was
no?
wrong.
I'm not asking for an explanation. All I want to know is yes or no. Before you shot him, you were upset that he had an engagement party for you at Put-in-Bay. Before you shot him, were you upset that he picked out the clothes you wore?
I didn't realize at the time that.
Yes or
I was
no?
being-
All I want to know is yes or no.
What's your point? I not understand the question.
We're getting to the
You
point.
asking me
Can
if
you
I was-
answer the questions and not argue with me, please? Karl Hoerig cannot come in here and explain any of these situations that you testified to, correct?
Yes, he can through the voice recordings.
No, he can't. Can Karl Hoerig come in this courtroom and testify?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Her behavior on the stand is in complete contrast to her behavior during her interrogation. It's almost like she realizes that she's got caught and she's lost the power, and now she's angry.
Like
men and women, they can flirt, but I never had anything with him, and I have no reason to hide that.
So he indicated to you...
Is that a crime?
I asked the questions here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
One way the prosecution tried to show this was a murder was the actual gunshot wounds themselves.
You shot and killed Karl Hoerig by putting not one, not two, but 3 shots into his body, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you put the gun 12 to 24 inches from his head and pulled the trigger, correct?
Probably.
Probably? Well, did somebody else break into the house and shoot him too?
Even the crime scene, the prosecution used to show proof of prior calculation and design, because according to her, she had shot him one time and believed that he was dead upon that first shot. But evidence shows, and she did admit, that she later shot at him at close range additionally and made sure essentially that he was dead.
We, the jury in this case, duly impaneled and sworn or affirm, find the defendant, Claudia C. Hoerig, guilty of aggravated murder as she stands charged in the first count of the indictment.
I was pleased with the guilty verdict because I think it was the right decision. All of her planning and preparation was for naught, essentially. They realized that she was not telling the truth.
We completed the mission, and we got justice for Karl, for his family, for his friends, for all of the people that knew and loved him.
You may think Claudia Hoerig will never step out of prison for the rest of her life, but is that actually the case? More when we return.
Think all court shows are the same?
We're talking about your father. Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Think again. Judge Caprio rules with common sense.
I was having contractions. I was rushing to the hospital.
Inspector Quinn, what does justice demand? Jail?
And compassion.
I'm going to take the circumstances into consideration.
The best court experience I've had.
Clearly, Judge, he's been in a court before.
Get caught in Providence.
Hi, I'm Dan Abrams. In the exploding legal and true crime genre, Law&Crime is the only network that has it all.
Good evening and welcome.
This is a complicated case.
Don't really jump to conclusions.
Welcome to Prime Crime Tonight. Another day of drama between both sides.
From multiple live trials daily to original and compelling programming, the Law&Crime Network is everywhere, and we invite you inside the jury box. This is Law&Crime.
Before you shot him, were you upset that you had had these miscarriages?
I'm not understanding your question.
Okay, let's move on.
Before when? 5 minutes, one day? I'm not understanding the question.
Claudia Hoerig, the woman who executed her husband Karl Hoerig in cold blood and then fled the country for over 10 years, was finally arrested, charged, and convicted of murder. At her sentencing, we heard the moving victim impact statements from Karl's family.
I want to list every moment that it has hurt me that Dad's gone. I want to talk about my beautiful kids he never met. I want to talk about grief and missed opportunities, but I would never be able to stop.
The loss of my brother is beyond words. The fact Claudia so arrogantly fled to a foreign country after killing my brother has been both heartbreaking and frustrating. Knowing Claudia selfishly went on with a normal life, starting a business, and getting remarried as if nothing had happened is difficult for me to comprehend.
People that have the ability to essentially live double lives or commit an act like this and then move on to something means that they're really good at compartmentalizing. So this is something that you'll see, in these cold-hearted psychopaths, but it's also a trait that's pretty characteristic in a lot of personality disorders.
We are here today for the long-awaited culmination of the worst possible circumstances contemplated in our criminal system.
Judge Logan sentenced the then 54-year-old to life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 28 years. As part of the extradition agreement between the United States and Brazil, Hoerig couldn't be sentenced to death, nor a term of imprisonment of over 30 years.
I think that deal would never have been stricken unless it was absolutely mandatory, and it was here. I don't think that the U.S. would ever have their hands on her if they hadn't made that deal. And of course, they will honor that deal. I don't think that she will ever be obviously considered for parole until those 28 years are up. But even then, parole can be denied indefinitely. So it'll be interesting to see how the parole board revisits this issue in 28 years.
As for Hoerig, the woman who said she didn't care what happened to her, her actions would say otherwise. In a legal letter after the trial, she complains that she's a victim of gross misconduct and blames everyone for her current predicament, including the government and her own trial attorney.
What it seems like is she's adopted this victim mentality, hoping that others will believe her to either gain sympathy or assuage her guilt.
She also hasn't fared too well legally. Her appeal has since been denied and conviction upheld.
The Court of Appeals found that there was sufficient evidence to show prior calculation and design. And essentially, they were able to show that the jury's verdict was based upon sound evidence.
In the end, it was the memory of Karl Hoerig that led to the eventual capture of his killer, and it's that memory that will live on in those who knew him.
He was a good friend. I really enjoyed flying with him. He was a great guy, a great pilot. He was a flight instructor, and he was just a joy to be around. It is truly a tragedy that we had to lose him at such a young age. And Karl was one of the best. He truly was.
Claudia Hoerig is just one of those defendants that gives you the chills. And I gotta tell you, when she said she was dead inside, she might be right. That's all we have for you here on Prime Crime. Leave us your comments on Instagram and Twitter with the hashtag PrimeCrime. As always, thank you for joining us, and until next time, be safe.